The Olympic National Forest in Washington State, in late fall 2024, was a cathedral of silence, a vast emerald expanse shrouded in a perpetual, damp hush. For Leon, a podcast editor whose life revolved around the subtle nuances of sound and the unforgiving precision of deadlines, this solitude was a pilgrimage. He had rented a state-of-the-art, sound-insulated recording studio cabin, a sleek, modern anomaly nestled deep within the ancient, moss-draped trees, believing the absolute quiet would be the perfect crucible for his complex audio documentary. He thrived on isolation, finding clarity in the absence of urban clamor. His first few days were idyllic. The rhythmic patter of rain on the cabin's reinforced roof provided a soothing backdrop to his work, the dense forest outside a comforting, impenetrable shield from the world. He meticulously arranged his high-end audio equipment, adjusting microphones, fine-tuning monitors, creating a perfect sonic sanctuary. The only sounds he permitted were the ones he carefully crafted, edited, and refined, shaping narratives from raw audio files, a master of the unseen. However, the rainy season he had anticipated quickly escalated into something far more severe and prolonged than any weather forecast had predicted. Record-breaking rainfall turned streams into raging torrents, and the usually gentle drizzle became a relentless drumming assault on the cabin. The forest, once a comforting embrace, began to feel like a suffocating shroud, its ancient trees pressing in, their shadows deepening into an ominous, watchful presence. Leon found himself increasingly cut off. The winding forest roads, his only connection to the nearest small town hours away, became treacherous, occasionally washed out by flash floods. His cell service, already spotty, became non-existent. The high-speed internet, his lifeline to clients and the outside world, flickered with increasing frequency before dying altogether, leaving him truly isolated, adrift in a sea of green and gray. One particularly violent night, the storm erupted with an unseasonable fury. Thunder, not just rumbling but truly cracking overhead, shook the cabin's very foundations, and lightning forked across the obsidian sky with terrifying frequency. The cabin's power grid, despite its robust design, flickered once, twice, then plunged the entire studio into a profound, suffocating darkness. The silence that followed was jarring, broken only by the deluge outside and the frantic beat of his own heart. He fumbled for his emergency lantern, its beam cutting a trembling path through the oppressive gloom. His immediate concern was his work, the thousands of hours of audio he hadn't backed up. He tried his satellite phone, then his laptop, then his tablet, all dead, lifeless husks of technology. The sudden total disconnect was jarring, a stark reminder of his extreme vulnerability in the heart of the wilderness. As he stood in the preternatural quiet, the only sound the furious assault of rain, a faint, almost imperceptible crackle reached his ears. It wasn't the sound of the storm, nor the cabin settling. It was coming from the corner of the room, from his old, vintage radio, a relic he kept more for aesthetic than function, a dusty prop on a forgotten shelf. He hadn't touched it since he arrived, and it was certainly unplugged. The crackle intensified. morphing into a hiss, then a distorted whisper. It was almost subliminal, just at the edge of audibility, like a secret meant only for him. He leaned closer, his breath catching in his throat. It wasn't just static. There was a pattern, a rhythm to it. And then, clear as a bell amidst the white noise, his name. L.L.Leon. The static rasped, the sound utterly chilling in the absolute darkness. He snatched up the radio, examining it in the lantern light, unplugged, completely disconnected. His mind, trained in the cold logic of audio engineering, struggled to reconcile what he was hearing with what he knew to be physically impossible. He shook the radio, tapped it, but the whispers continued, growing slightly clearer, more insistent, no longer just his name, but faint, pleading tones laced with a profound, unsettling sadness. He dropped the radio as if it were burning, his heart hammering against his ribs. The whispers, however, didn't stop. They seemed to echo from the very air, then subtly from the inert screens of his unplugged laptop, his dead smartphone, even the massive silent studio monitors. A pervasive, malevolent hum began to fill the sound-insulated cabin, a chorus of whispering static that wasn't just interference, but a chilling, personal message from something ancient and unseen, something that knew his name, and was now trapped with him in the heart of the stormy, isolated forest. The initial shock of the whispering static gave way to a cold, creeping dread that settled deep in Leon's bones. He swept the cabin again with his lantern, frantically checking every corner, every shadow, searching for any logical source, a hidden speaker, a faulty wire, a cruel prank. But the cabin's sound-insulated design was impeccable, its silence usually absolute, and the source of the whispers remained maddeningly elusive. Shifting from the radio to his dead laptop, then to his unplugged studio monitors, a ghostly chorus. Moving through the inert electronics, his professional expertise, usually a source of confidence, became his torment. His keen ear, trained to dissect imperfect audio, now registered every subtle nuance of the whispering static, the faint distortion that made the voices sound inhuman, the chilling clarity of his own name amidst the white noise, the underlying current of profound sorrow that vibrated through the very air of the cabin. It was a perfect, horrifying sound mix, produced by an unseen engineer. As the storm outside raged with relentless fury, mirroring the chaos within his mind, the whispers became more coherent, more personal. They no longer merely called his name. They began to comment on his thoughts, his anxieties, his reclusive nature. "You prefer the quiet, don't you, Leon?" A distorted voice rasped from his dead smartphone, its screen remaining stubbornly black. "But the quiet, it can also listen." The invasiveness of the knowledge was a violation more profound than any physical threat. The cabin itself began to manifest subtle, yet undeniable supernatural activity, as if the raw electrical energy of the storm outside was now feeding a malevolent presence within. Localized cold spots would suddenly appear, sending shivers down his spine, even in the insulated interior. Objects would subtly vibrate on his desk, a pen rolling a fraction of an inch, a sheet of paper trembling, as if touched by an unseen hand. The faint scent of damp earth and decay, reminiscent of ancient waterlogged soil, started to permeate the air, blending with the cloying sweetness of the lily-like aroma he sometimes detected. Leon attempted to call out, to demand answers, to challenge the unseen tormentor, but his voice was hoarse, swallowed by the deafening roar of the storm and the ever-present hum of the whispering static. He tried to ignore it, to immerse himself back in his work, but the dead screens of his equipment stared back at him, mocking his efforts, their surfaces occasionally flickering with faint, almost imperceptible images, blurry faces fleeting, shadows too quick to discern, yet undeniably present. His pre-existing anxiety about silence, a minor quirk before, now escalated into full-blown terror. The cabin, once his sanctuary, was now a prison of sound, filled with the insidious murmurs of the whispering static. He yearned for the mundane noise of the city, for the predictable distractions, anything to drown out the chilling, personal transmissions that preyed on his deepest fears. Twisting his own thoughts against him, sleep became impossible. Every shadow seemed to ride. Every creak of the old cabin became a phantom footstep. He would close his eyes, only to hear the voices clearer, closer, forming fragmented sentences, glimpses into a past he couldn't comprehend. He saw blurry landscapes of an ancient forest, heard the cries of unnamed animals, felt the searing touch of lightning as if it struck his own skin, all channeled through the pervasive, malevolent hum. He stumbled to the cabin's few windows, peering out into the torrential rain and the impenetrable darkness of the forest. The lightning strikes were almost constant now, illuminating the twisted, grasping branches of the ancient trees, making them look like skeletal hands reaching for the cabin. He felt an undeniable connection between the storm's ferocity and the escalating power of the whispering static, as if the storm was not just a backdrop, but an active, malevolent participant, fueling the entity's ability to communicate. Transmissions became more aggressive, no longer just whispers but distorted, guttural commands, attempts to exert control. His old radio, still unplugged, suddenly blared to life, not with static, but with a horrifying, drawn-out scream that tore through the air, vibrating through the very floorboards. He clamped his hands over his ears, but the sound seemed to resonate. From within his own skull, a terrifying symphony of pure anguish. Leon crumpled to the floor, his professional sanity unraveling under the relentless assault. He was no longer just hearing things. He was being overwhelmed, his mind becoming a canvas for the entity's terrifying broadcast. He was trapped, utterly alone in the heart of the storm-ravaged Olympic National Forest. His only companions the whispering static and the dawning, terrifying realization that this malevolent force wasn't just observing him, but actively trying to break him, to consume him, to make him a part of its eternal horrifying transmission. The relentless, soul-shattering shriek from the radio was the breaking point. Leon scrambled away from the device, blindly fumbling for anything to silence it. But the sound seemed to physically assault him, vibrating through his teeth, rattling his very bones. The air in the cabin grew thick, heavy with the phantom scent of damp earth and decay, now so potent it choked him, making each breath a conscious, agonizing effort. His professional sanity, meticulously built over years of precise audio work, completely fractured. He was no longer just a listener. He was an unwilling participant, his mind becoming a crucible for the whispering static's terrifying broadcast. The cold spots solidified into distinct, chilling presences, brushing against him, tugging at his clothes, their unseen forms pressing. And from all sides, he felt a profound sense of claustrophobia, trapped not just by the storm, but by the burgeoning, malevolent entity within the cabin. Driven by a primal instinct for survival, Leon decided he had to escape, storm or no storm. He stumbled towards the cabin door, his movements sluggish, as if wading through unseen water. But the powerful, unseasonable rain outside had turned the immediate area around the cabin into a treacherous, muddy quagmire. The sound of flash floods roaring through nearby gullies was audible even through the cabin's thick insulation. A deafening roar that swallowed the crackling static for a brief, terrifying moment. He peered through a window, his emergency lantern beam cutting through the torrential downpour. Massive ancient trees, battered by the furious winds, swayed precariously, their branches snapping with explosive cracks. Several had already fallen, creating an impenetrable barricade across his narrow access road. The nearest small town, already hours away, was now an unreachable beacon in a world consumed by tempest and terror. He was truly, utterly isolated. The whispering static, sensing his desperation, intensified its assault. The voices became clearer, individual, distinct, not just the distorted malevolence, but also the plaintive cries of children, the desperate pleas of women, the guttural moans of men. They seemed to rise from the very floorboards, echoing from the walls, manifesting through every inert electronic device in the room. They knew his fears, his anxieties, his very essence twisting his reclusive nature into a weapon against him. "You can't leave, Leon," a distorted voice rasped from his dead studio monitor, its black screen flickering with faint, almost imperceptible images, blurred landscapes of an ancient, mist-shrouded forest, glimpses of unseen rituals, the shadowy figures of nameless, ancient beings. "You are ours now." Part of the transmission. The words vibrated directly within his skull, a chilling certainty that pierced through his unraveling sanity. He staggered back, away from the monitor, his legs giving way. He crumpled to the floor, clutching his head, trying to block out the relentless cacophony of voices and the invading images. But they were within him now, deeply embedded, painting his mind with visions of a horrifying past, a past connected to the very land the cabin stood upon, a history of pain and sacrifice that resonated with the entity's malevolent energy. The storm outside seemed to rage, in direct response to the entity's influence. Lightning struck closer, illuminating the cabin with terrifying flashes that revealed the spectral forms of countless figures now swirling around him in the room. Translucent, desperate, their mouths open in silent screams. He could feel their cold touch, their ghostly hands brushing against his skin, pulling at his clothes, trying to physically manifest their hunger for connection growing with the storm's intensity. He saw, through their eyes, terrifying fragments of what had transpired. On this land, not just human sorrow, but something far older, far more primal. Glimpses of sacrifice, of powerful rituals performed under stormy skies, of life force being drawn from the earth itself, harnessed by an ancient, shadowy cult. The entity wasn't just a collective of human spirits. It was a hungry, primeval force, awakened and amplified by the raw electrical energy of the storm, and it sought to absorb him, to make him its ultimate conductor. Leon lay on the floor, shivering uncontrollably, his body racked by tremors. He was no longer just a listener. He was becoming a vessel, a conduit. The whispering static wasn't merely trying to break him. It was actively trying to become him, to merge his consciousness with its ancient, suffering broadcast. The storm outside howled, a symphony of destruction, and inside the sound-insulated cabin, Leon could feel his own mind slipping away, his own voice drowning in the terrifying, endless chorus of the unheard transmissions. The terrifying realization of his impending absorption, the merging of his consciousness with the ancient, suffering entity, spurred Leon into a final, desperate surge of defiance. His body, racked by tremors and fatigue, screamed in protest. But his mind, though fractured, clung to the last vestiges of his individuality. He was a podcast editor, a master of sound, and if he was to be consumed, he would not go silently into that terrifying, static-filled night. He crawled towards his main audio interface, a complex piece of equipment still stubbornly displaying a faint power indicator, fueled by some residual energy. The spectral forms swirled around him, their translucent hands reaching, their silent screams echoing in the cacophony of the whispering static. He knew with a chilling certainty that this was his last chance, a desperate gamble to send out. A final unheard transmission of his own. With trembling fingers, he managed to activate a single powerful input channel. The entity, sensing his intent, redoubled its assault. The whispers became a roar, the screams of physical assault, threatening to shatter his eardrums. His studio monitors, still unplugged, flickered with horrifying images, not just the ancient, forest, but grotesque, distorted faces of the entity's past victims, their eyes filled with his own fear, their mouths open in a terrifying echo of his own silent agony. He fought through the pain, through the overwhelming dread, his fingers fumbling with a microphone connection. He had to record, to document, to somehow send out a signal, a warning, a final testament to the horrifying truth he had uncovered. It was a futile gesture, he knew, but a desperate act of rebellion against the consuming void that threatened to erase him entirely. Just as he managed to connect the microphone, a blinding flash of lightning struck impossibly close to the cabin, followed by a thunderclap that ripped through the very air, shaking the foundations of the building. The power surged briefly, violently, not just in the cabin, but through the entire storm-ravaged forest, a raw, untamed burst of electrical energy. In that instant, the whispering static reached its crescendo. The voices, the screams, the images, all converged into a single, overwhelming surge of pure, agonizing information, flooding Leon's mind. He felt his consciousness stretch, thin, and then snap, his individuality dissolving into the collective horror. He saw, through myriad eyes, centuries of torment, of life force drawn, of souls absorbed, a terrifying, endless cycle of consumption. Then, darkness. Not the darkness of the cabin without power, but a profound internal darkness, vast and cold. Leon's body slumped against the floor, his eyes wide and vacant, his breath shallow, a mere whisper of life remaining. The incessant rain outside continued, a mournful drumbeat against the cabin, but the silence inside was now absolute, broken only by the faint, rhythmic hum of dormant electronics. Days later, when the storm finally abated and a search and rescue team, alerted by his concerned client, finally reached the cabin, they found Leon. He was alive, barely, his body impossibly cold, his eyes staring blankly into nothingness. There were no signs of injury, no logical explanation for his catatonic state. Emergency services, stretched thin by the storm's aftermath, attributed it to severe hypothermia and shock, transporting him to the nearest hospital. He never fully recovered. Leon remained in a state of profound, silent withdrawal, unresponsive to any stimuli. Doctors were baffled, attributing his condition to a severe psychological break, unable to find any physical cause. He spent his days staring into space, a faint, vacant smile occasionally gracing his lips, as if listening to something only he could hear. But sometimes, when a severe electrical storm swept through the region, nurses at the hospital would report strange phenomena near Leon's room. Unplugged radios in storage closets would crackle with faint static. Dormant hospital monitors would flicker with imperceptible images, and a chilling, almost imperceptible hum would resonate through the walls. It was Leon, they suspected, or something within him, sending out a signal. For Leon was no longer just a podcast editor. He was now a permanent part of the broadcast, a living receiver for the unheard transmissions, forever connected to the malevolent static, his silence suffering a perpetual broadcast into the vast, unknowable ether.